We have a group in our church called Teen Talk, and teenagers come together and talk. And so I asked a question at one of these meetings. I said, do you know anybody that has a gun? Well, I was surprised. There were several of them raised their hand. But I said, if you wanted a gun, could you get one? I mean, it was like going to get a candy bar. Yeah, oh yeah, we can go get a gun. We know where we can go and get them.
There's an untold story in America's gun debate about the flow of firearms, from the rural to the urban. These are two gun cultures that, for all their differences, are undeniably connected.
Somebody started shooting at them, they ran for cover in another apartment, then that same person shot up that place.
The national gun debate has centered on mass shootings like at Sandy Hook. But meanwhile, violence in America's inner cities has claimed far more lives and made fewer headlines. In 2012, 506 people were killed in Chicago. In New Orleans, that number was 193. In Baltimore, Maryland, 217. Right here in the Heartland, Missouri sits at the forefront of the national gun rights movement. It's a microcosm of the competing political interests seen throughout the country between cities and rural towns, and the cities are losing.
Political party means actually less in this General Assembly, party affiliation, than where you live.
In some parts of the state, guns mean violence, but for much of Missouri, firearms are about heritage.
There's little one-room schoolhouses all around this neighborhood, and it was very common for a kid to take his rifle to school with him. Back in those days, lean his rifle in the corner while he went to school, and on the way home, he'd squirrel hunt or rabbit hunt to add to dinner for that night.
Mr. Speaker, our constitutions are the supreme laws of this land.
And while the national gun debate in early 2013 focused on potential new restrictions,
surely we can do better than this.
State lawmakers here in Missouri approved perhaps the boldest set of bills in the nation to keep guns available and legal almost anywhere. A bill allowing concealed carry of guns in schools by teachers. A bill to ban publicly identifying gun owners. And here's the big one. A bill that would not only make it a crime for federal agencies to enforce new gun restrictions in Missouri, but would actually nullify all federal gun laws, essentially telling Washington, D.C., your rules don't apply here.
This bill is the state of Missouri putting its foot down, drawing a line in the sand and saying that we do not feel the federal government is competent in this area, and we are going to pull that authority back.
These bills passed with such a wide majority that even after a veto from the state's Democratic governor, lawmakers will have enough support to override that veto and make these bills into law. The State House is dominated by lawmakers from the country, from mid-Missouri. But far removed from the state capital of Jefferson City, where those proposals are made, Missouri cities are feeling the sting of some of the nation's worst gun crime. 2010 FBI data shows Missouri suffered the second highest number of gun murders per capita of any state, next to Louisiana. And most of the pain is felt in just 3 counties. Jackson, which is home to Kansas City, then there's St. Louis County, and St. Louis City, which is a county itself. Together, these counties hold almost exactly 1/3 of Missouri's population, but they see more than 55% of all the state's violent crimes, and almost 70% of all murders in Missouri occur here.
I see young folks carrying them. A lot of these guys around here don't carry the guns, but they have access to go get them. They may have them stashed around a corner up under a leaf or something, or in a house, a vacant house, or somebody's house to go get it.
We want our streets to be safe again for our children. We want our young people to be able to, in the summertime, right now, and ride up and down the streets with their bike.
We first saw Reverend B.T. Rice's name on an op-ed he wrote for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It was called, "I'm Tired of Preaching at Funerals." After members of his own congregation were killed in shootings, he started an initiative to reduce violence on the streets of St. Louis, along with St. Louis Police Chief Sam Dotson, Mayor Francis Slay, and other community leaders. We spoke with Reverend Rice less than 2 weeks after one of the city's most violent nights in years. On June 11, 2013, 17 people were shot across St. Louis City and County in 7 different shootings.
Around midnight, a man, he was shot in the calf in the 5300 block of Broadway.
Police say 5 more people, 3 young women and 2 young men, were shot.
Police say the gunman approached a man wearing headphones and demanded his cell phone.
A woman shot in the leg in an attempted robbery.
As the victim reached into his pocket, he was shot in the knee. And St. Louis police are also investigating a shooting and armed robbery in the city's Tower Grove Heights neighborhood.
A few minutes after that, 4 people were shot in the 700 block of Aubert.
A crazy, violent night in the city.
They reached a point where you figure enough is absolutely enough. Not only is it my experience, but I have a fellow clergyman, friend of mine, that it's just come commonplace. So I have a funeral today of the kid that got shot, or the young lady that was hit by a drive-by, and those kinds of situations. And so that's what drove us to say, you know, we got to get into this.
Rice uses the words sensible and reasonable a lot when talking about guns. You have to in Missouri. He's in favor of background checks and some restrictions, but he thinks it's about mental health as well. Still, the violence this community and communities across St. Louis see makes you wonder. The guns that are used in violent crimes in St. Louis, where do they come from? Are they stolen? Are they bought legally, illegally?
There are a couple of ways that we've found that guns get into the hands of criminals in the city of St. Louis. First one you talked about is the guns are stolen. They're either taken in home burglaries or they're taken out of cars when people that have legitimate CCW permits go to venues like the ballpark where they can't take their gun into the game and they leave it in their cars. So the message really there is hey, be a responsible gun owner. The second way that we see guns, illegal guns getting into the hands of criminals are through the loopholes in the background checks for purchasing a gun. Since the laws went into effect in the early 90s, backgrounds catch about 60% of the gun transactions that happen. 40% of the transactions don't require background checks. So if I were a criminal and I wanted to get a gun, I would go to that 40% to the gun shows, for example, that don't capture the background or don't require the backgrounds and purchase a gun there.
So many of the guns that reach the streets of St. Louis indirectly come from gun shows and gun owners. It's the system of purchasing guns at these gun shows that makes it so easy for criminals to get their hands on them.
We see lots of straw purchases. And straw purchases are when an individual that can legitimately go in and buy a gun, goes in and buys a gun, and then in a relatively short amount of period of time, that gun's transferred into the hands of someone that shouldn't have a gun.
Behind theft, those straw purchases are the second leading way firearms make it to the streets of St. Louis. A private seller can sell a gun to anyone with no background check for criminal history or mental illness required by law. But worse, this loophole often puts weapons in the hands of criminals when the initial buyer turns around and completes yet another private sale. Again, no background check required. Police say requiring background checks in all cases could help cut off illegal firearms at the source.
Bob Stanzy's wife was pregnant with twins when he was killed.
Chief Sam Dotson says his own officers have been killed with guns that slip through those loopholes, and along with the city's mayor, he's active in gun control efforts in the Midwest, calling for expanded background checks and weapons restrictions. But you'll hear concerns about the system from the other end of the political spectrum as well.
I've been in this business about 35 years. You'll see a lot of guys walking around in a gun show selling guns that I feel should not be here. They do not do a background check. They'll sell it to anybody who's got the money.
Those private sellers.
They're private sellers.
The term gun show here can actually be kind of misleading.
Do you have any people buy throwing stars? Saw a lot of throwing stars?
There are plenty of firearms, yes, but there's a good variety of other weapons as well, some less practical.
Ever felt the need to buy a hand grenade, Jamal?
Yes. Hellfire is an advanced trigger system that enables your semi-automatic sporting rifle to fire as if it were a fully automatic rapid-fire weapon and still retain legal status. You will actually feel the trigger move as if it were converted to fully automatic fire.
A gun show is not exactly friendly territory for a reporter with a camera. Trying to find a table in a sea of skeptical faces, it's something like being the new kid in the middle school cafeteria. And good luck getting anybody to talk to you. Of the 15 or so vendors we approached, Gary Halbrook, a licensed seller of more than 3 decades, was the only one who would speak to us on camera. He's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and aside from background checks, he opposes gun restrictions. But he had some unsettling things to say about private sellers.
The thing of it is, the private seller in a gun show, just walking the floor trying to peddle a gun, he's under none of those stipulations. He could buy a gun from a felon and sell it to another felon. We don't know. And there's no way to correct that.
Guns are ingrained into Midwest culture. It's not just about the firearm, it's about individual liberty and family heritage.
My first rifle, a moment you never forget.
And when guns are so pervasive, it's easy to forget just how powerful they are.
It's got some pop.
It's just second nature to me to have a gun. I can't imagine not having a gun.
Why would a citizen buy a gun? Somebody outside of law enforcement protection? Or
Self-protection, absolutely. Protection in the home, protection on the street. I'm a strong proponent of concealed carry.
They did give us the option of an Obama target at first. I think they were joking. I'm not entirely sure.
In Missouri, it takes 8 hours of training in a range like this one to be approved for a conceal and carry license. That's approval to carry a hidden firearm like a handgun.
Got invited to the Christmas party by mistake. Who knew?
And while we'd all like to think we'd turn into an action star if the circumstances called for it, the truth is using that weapon away from the gun range is an entirely different experience.
It's a lot different. These paper targets don't shoot back. And testosterone has a big part in it. I mean, you get tunnel vision. You don't know what's going on around you. You break out in a sweat. It's quite an experience. It's not like shooting on the range here. No way.
Gary's been in the gun show circuit a long time, but for the last 8 months or so, business has been booming, more so than he's ever seen.
The month of January and February, I sold more guns in those 2 months than I did all last year together.
Why do you think that is?
Obama.
6-7 Sandy Hook School. Caller's indicating she thinks there's someone shooting in the building. At all units, the individual that I have on the phone is continuing to hear what he believes to be guns.
In the Midwest and elsewhere, guns have sold at an astounding rate since last December. That's when a 20-year-old man walked into Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut and in 5 minutes fired 154 shots from a Bushmaster rifle. He killed 20 children and 6 educators and then shot himself with a Glock handgun.
Very, very proud to be here with my good friend Pat Toomey from my sister state of Pennsylvania.
New gun laws looked like a sure bet. Supporters of gun control thought they'd at least see a new law for universal background checks, sponsored by senators from both major parties. That would have put an end to those paperless private sales at gun shows. But rarely has such high-profile legislation failed so miserably, so quickly. It wasn't even close.
Are we really prepared to say that we're powerless?
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Why are they against universal background checks when 92% of the American public is in favor of them?
Assault weapons ban. Boom, there it is.
Are we prepared to say that such violence visited on our children year after year after year is somehow the price of our freedom?
I've got to tell you candidly, I don't consider criminal background checks to be gun control. I think it's just common sense.
Increased background checks.
This is a 90% issue. You can't get 90% of Americans to agree on the weather.
Even if you had all your universal background check, bad guys are going to get guns.
What this is about is the ability of the gun industry to sell as many guns to as many people as possible.
A mandatory 1 hour waiting period if you buy a gun.
Why a mandatory?
Are you kidding me?
The yeas are 54, the nays are 46. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
The gun rights crowd does dominate government in Missouri, but the state has its fighters for gun control as well. Stacey Newman is one of them. She represents part of St. Louis County, one of those 3 counties. She's been active on this issue for a while.
85% of Missourians support some of these common sense things, very identical to what's coming out of the White House. So these are gun owners, these are NRA members, but the fear here in Missouri, like you said, we have 28 gun bills that have been filed. 28. Again, we can't do Medicaid expansion. We can't talk about funding for, for schools. We can't talk about any jobs bills. 28 gun bills, and most of them are, identical or similar to what's going on in other states. It's all based on that fear that we're going to come in and take your guns. No one wants to take your guns.
There was no serious talk nationally, and certainly not in Missouri, of confiscating guns from their owners. But 2013 did see an ill-fated attempt to renew a ban on certain kinds of weapons. That effort headed up by California Senator Dianne Feinstein.
With velocities and energy far exceeding the standard handguns. They don't belong on the streets.
But looking at gun crime data, the so-called assault weapons ban doesn't get to the root of the problem. For one, it's superficial.
They determined that the flash hider was an evil feature and the bayonet lug was an evil feature. The removable magazine, high-capacity magazine, was an evil feature. The pistol grip was an evil feature, and the collapsible stock. What they said was a rifle to be legal can only have so many of these evil features, not all of them, okay? So if you look at this one here, this one has a smooth barrel, no flash hider. It has just a standard front sight deal, no bayonet lug.
And this is the AR-15.
This is AR-15. These are exactly the same. They shoot the same cartridges, they take the same magazines, they both fire semi-automatic, but this one would be legal. So this would be illegal, this would be legal.
The ban also somewhat misses the mark. The latest FBI data shows assault rifles were only responsible for 4% of gun-related homicides in 2011. Handguns, meanwhile, were behind 72% of those killings, the vast majority. And this is especially the problem in cities. The gun control bills put forward by Missouri Democrats have a smaller scope, but there's still not a whole lot they can do. The lawmakers representing urban areas in St. Louis and Kansas City are hopelessly outnumbered.
Is there anything as a minority caucus you can do to bring pressure on the Republicans as far as floor action or any actions on bills?
We're taking a look at that.
Though as any grizzled State House reporter will tell you, it doesn't mean they haven't tried and failed.
Yeah, mention how long you've been here, working here.
I'm too old to remember how long I've been here. I'm Phil Brooks. I've been covering Missouri State House for something beyond 4 decades, going back to the late 1960s. I got a list of the bills that would toughen gun regulation and would give you a little bit of an idea of what happened to those. Require that all firearms sales be done by a licensed dealer. That never got out of a House committee. Make possession of a high-capacity magazine. That never got out of a House committee. Allow a police officer to remove a firearm when he responds to a domestic disturbance call. That measure never even got assigned to a committee to be considered. It just simply was introduced, and then the House Speaker just simply allowed it to sit there and languish away and die. And that's just some of these bills that went nowhere in this General Assembly. There was no real interest in moving on these kind of issues by a General Assembly in which Republicans hold a 2/3 majority in both the House and in the Senate.
You must have something of a feeling of hopelessness almost when it comes to
well,
your influence on the
I've been
issue.
doing this a real long time. I came to office 13 years ago because of gun violence. That was my #1 issue that propelled me to legislative office. So I know this issue very well, and I understand that I'm in the minority, but I also know I'm in the majority of not just Americans, but Missourians who want something done.
We are Americans. We are proud of it. And we are going to defend our freedom, we promise you.
Nationally, proponents of gun control like Stacey Newman have run into fierce opposition from the National Rifle Association. The group has been crucial in fighting off new federal restrictions. But here in Missouri, the group's absence from the state's political scene is pretty remarkable.
There's no Missouri person who works inside this building who registered this year as a lobbyist for the National Rifle Association. The campaign contributions that they make to candidates here in Missouri for statewide and legislative offices is not particularly large. It's not a huge amount of money. My sense is that gun rights support is so strong in Missouri, there really is no need for the NRA to exert effort in this state. The legislators themselves will take care of the issue for them.
Phil Brooks has been covering Missouri politics for 4 decades. He's now a professor for the University of Missouri's journalism school, and he's seen the divide between urban and rural lawmakers up close.
The gun rights support is strongly from rural areas. It's also strongly from the suburban Republican districts of St. Louis and Kansas City. But in St. Louis City, in Kansas City, there is tremendous opposition to these measures that the legislature has been passing and has been debating. The mayor of St. Louis, Francis Slay, has been one of the leaders of mayors across the country in arguing for tougher gun legislation, firearms regulation, because of the high homicide rate that St. Louis is suffering, that Kansas City is suffering.
If Missouri's on the front lines for the gun rights movement, Representative Doug Funderburk is one of the lawmakers leading the charge.
I find it interesting that the creators of the federal government, which are the states, are now being told by the child they created, he's not going to listen to them.
He wrote the bill to nullify federal gun laws in Missouri, a measure few other states have dared to take. The first was Kansas, and almost immediately they found themselves the target of the U.S. Justice Department, with claims they were violating the Constitution's supremacy clause.
I've got Article 6, Clause 2, U.S. Constitution. It says, the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Right, so tell me, how is your law in accordance with the U.S. Constitution?
Right. Well, my bill is addressing a constitutional right. The supremacy clause only applies to federal law. It doesn't apply. It doesn't make federal law superior to the U.S. Constitution. It's not a law. It's not a privilege. It's a right. That makes it above. In fact, what it does is restricts the authority of any government to limit that right.
These are educated attorneys who know that this bill that they sent to the governor is illegal, it contradicts federal law, and that there will be litigation. It's the most blatant in terms of nullification. That's exactly what it does.
But of course, this isn't the first fight over nullification to be waged in Missouri. Another conflict about 150 years ago played a decently large role in determining what kind of rights the term states' rights really meant. More recently, many states found themselves again at odds with the federal government over desegregating schools, again in a debate over states' rights and whether states were able to simply do away with federal laws they weren't too keen on issues of race, schools, or on guns.
We want senior citizens to be able to stroll down the street in the evening and take a walk, sit on their porch. They can't do that anymore because we're living in an environment of fear.
If you live along Euclid Street in St. Louis, you run a 1 in 12 chance of becoming a victim of violent crime each and every year. This is part of our 3 counties, and as lawmakers in Jefferson City are racing each other to drop restrictions on guns, the locals here have no problems at all finding a firearm.
Guns are easy to come by in this area?
Yeah, they're easy to come by. I mean, you want one now?
Where would we go?
You know, I'll come up with it. Give me like 2 hours, I'll come up with it.
Butch has lived along Euclid and MLK Boulevard in St. Louis for almost 30 years. He's seen the gun trade here firsthand, and just like Reverend Rice and Chief Dotson, he says people here are taking advantage of loopholes and taking part in the system of straw purchases.
And a lot of people might know some people who own guns that are not registered. When they just paid for it, they just bought. You see what I'm saying? That they can go get the gun from and go kill this person and throw it away or, get caught with it.
When you look at the most violent cities in America, it's less about how strict or loose gun laws in those cities are, and it's more about the city's proximity to free-flowing gun cultures. D.C. has strict laws, but Virginia doesn't. Chicago has strict laws, Illinois not so much. In fact, 57% of guns Chicago police recovered from 2008 to 2012 came from states with lax gun laws, often Indiana or Missouri. The city's restrictions don't mean so much when they're surrounded by such laissez-faire gun regions. In Missouri, loose gun laws have helped the flow of firearms into those 3 urban counties, covering Kansas City and St. Louis, even if politicians in Jefferson City won't acknowledge that.
2010 and 2011 FBI gun data ranks Missouri as the 2nd and then 3rd state for gun violence per capita as a percentage of all crimes.
Right. Now take 3 counties out of that, and what do you have?
That's true, but they're still part of Missouri, and your law and other gun laws apply to those parts of Missouri.
Right, and so maybe we can do a better job now instead of waiting for the federal government to enact and enforce. Maybe we can do a better job by doing it locally. You know, you take 3 counties out of that mix, and Missouri is a very, very safe place to live.
That's unfortunately a very Pollyannish view. Let's legislate to the rural areas and let's not worry about the loss of life in those urban areas. We have to be serious about saving lives across the state, and you can't make laws that cut out the city of St. Louis or cut out Kansas City. I would challenge the legislators in Jefferson City to be responsible for the entire state.
Everything we pass, everything that becomes law, is not per county. It's policy that affects everyone in the state. And if those are the 3 largest counties in the state, obviously in terms of population, why don't we care about them? Why do we turn our backs on that? What's our answer?